All right, Branch County. So we are waiting on Irene. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes. There might be some technical difficulties. We're not quite sure. So please be patient, and I will let you know what's going on as soon as I hear back. All right. Thanks. Okay, Branch County, it looks like we are going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We have made contact and thank you so much for your patience. We will be starting very shortly.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Judy, how are you?
I'm well. How are you today?
I am well as well. It is a beautiful day here in Michigan, a little windy, but beautiful.
I know, isn't it? We really have to relish these kinds of days, right?
Absolutely.
It's going to snow tomorrow.
It
Hi,
is.
Irene.
Hi, Irene. We can't see you yet.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, Judy.
Hi, Irene.
Somebody's hiding me. Start my video. Here we go.
Oh, it is lovely to see you, Irene.
Thank you. Great to see everybody I can see now.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our One Book, One County Grand Finale event. I am Jessica. I'm the Director of Public Services at the Branch District Library. And One Book, One County is something that we do every year to encourage our patrons, excuse me, to take a journey together in the same book. I would like to thank especially our friends of the Coldwater Library and friends of the Union Library for their sponsorship of this event. Additionally, we want to thank the Book Haven in Quincy for making our 2021 Book One County book, Shores Beyond Shores, available for purchase. If you are interested in buying that, the books are $20 plus tax, and please send the Book Haven a message on Facebook or their website or give them a call. So the Branch District Library chose Shores Beyond Shores for multiple reasons, not the least of which is the indomitable spirit of hope entwined in this entire memoir. It is my absolute honor and privilege to introduce to you Irene Butter. Irene Butter is a well-known peace activist, Holocaust survivor, and Professor Emerita of Public Health at the University of Michigan. She is a frequent and favored inspirational speaker, talking about her experience during World War II and stressing the importance of never a bystander and that one person can make a difference. Excuse me. Irene is a co-founder of Zaytuna, an organization of Jewish and Arab women working for peace, and founder of the Roel Wallenberg Project at University of Michigan, which honors the Swedish diplomat who saved thousands of Jews with fellowships and an annual award for peace workers, such as the Dalai Lama, Elie Wiesel, and Desmond Tutu, among others. I would also like to take the time to introduce to you Judy Miller, the journalist interviewing Irene today. Judy Stanford Miller is a curriculum designer and original content producer with a focus on aligning current events with literature to foster meaningful learning for middle school and high school students. With a passion to keep history alive, Judy has created comprehensive units of content on the Holocaust, the Civil Rights Movement, and the arsenal of democracy. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Irene and Judy.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Can you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Irene.
Oh, that's good.
This is Judy. Well, thank you, Jessica. It's really an honor to be here today. In an article I wrote for our school audience just after Irene's book was published in 2018, I said her book is a gift to history and humanity. And 2 years later, her story, her book, and her messages are really more important than ever. So I know many in the audience have probably already read Shores Beyond Shores, but we thought we would begin today with Irene giving an overview of her life experiences. Heartbreaking yet hopeful, as she continues to be an inspiration for many generations with her guiding principles of never a bystander, refuse to be enemies, and triumph over tragedy. So Irene, can you begin your overview with your early childhood in Berlin, and then walk us through your years in Amsterdam, 2 concentration camps, and then the refugee camp in Algeria?
So to begin, I was born in Berlin. And when Hitler came to power, the Jews were persecuted, started the persecution. I had a very happy childhood, living with my loving parents, my brother, and loving grandparents. We lived in the same house and they spoiled us, and I have nothing but wonderful memories. Now, at some point, the Nazis took away my grandfather's bank that he had owned for many, many years. And my father was a partner in the bank. And once the bank was no longer in the family, my father was unemployed. Well, reading the writing on the wall, he wanted to escape Germany, to escape Hitler, and moved the family to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And here we resettled, learned the language, went to school, were received very generously by the Dutch people. After 2 years, the Nazis invaded and Holland became an occupied country, and persecution of the Jews escalated. There were many restrictions. I'll skip over all that. But at one point, the deportation began. And before we were deported to 2 concentration camps, the first one, Westerbork, which was a German concentration camp, a transient camp, to Bergen-Belsen, a camp in Germany. Before we were arrested in Amsterdam, my father had the opportunity to contact a consul in Stockholm, Sweden, and apply for South American passports. There were many consuls who issued many passports to Jews all over Europe, but the passports did not arrive. And here we were in Westerbork for several months and received a package containing 4 passports for Ecuador. Now, this was the first miracle because the Nazis did not forward any mail from our home address in Amsterdam, but here were the passports. And that's the only time I saw smiles on the faces of my parents. Now, these passports were so critical because they transferred our status from just being Jews, Jewish prisoners, to exchange Jews. And exchange referred to a foreign policy of the Nazis, whereby they planned at some point during the war, they would be able to exchange Jews with passports. for German citizens and German prisoners of war. So after we had been classified as exchange Jews, we were deported to Bergen-Belsen. And one of the camps in Bergen-Belsen was an exchange camp. The prisoners there were mostly people who had passports to Allied countries. Now, Bergen-Belsen was horrible. We experienced terribly brutality there. And I won't enumerate all the threats to our lives. But after almost 1 year, we were told that there would be an exchange transport. And in the meantime, my mother had taken sick. She was bedridden for several months. And my father's health was extremely compromised. There was a station with a German doctor that would select the people who would go on this train, leaving the hell of Bergen-Belsen, leaving Germany, and travel to Switzerland, where the exchange would take place. My mother couldn't walk to the station with the doctor to where the selection took place. And this is now the second miracle. I was mistaken for my mother. Here I was a 14-year-old girl. My mother was in her 40s. We weighed 76 kilos when we left Bergen-Belsen. We wore rags, and maybe that was our luck. The doctor took me for my mother. And so the four of us, my family, was told that tomorrow, next day, we would leave on a train to Switzerland. It was a true miracle. Now, when we got on the train, we were immeasurably happy to have survived and to leave this horrible place. But unfortunately, 2 days later, my father died on the train and was buried in a small town in southern Germany. My mother, my brother, and I arrived in Switzerland 2 days later. My mother and my brother were extremely ill and were taken to a hospital immediately from the train station. I, at 14 years at that point, was not all that sick, but was not allowed to stay in Switzerland because they claimed they already had too many refugees. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So I was then sent to a refugee camp in Algiers, North Africa.
Irene, before we get to Algeria, can you just go over the couple nights before you left Bergen-Belsen and what you and Hannalie threw a bundle of clothes over the fence to Anne and Frank? Sure.
I had become friends with another girl from Holland. She and I, Hannalie, lived in the same barrack, and she was a close friend of Anne Frank before all of this happened. One day, well, I have to mention that the Frank family, of course, ended up in Auschwitz. And some months before this day, there were hundreds of women who came from Auschwitz and were in a camp adjoining to ours, separated by barbed wire, and we weren't supposed to talk or even go near the fence. And then one evening, Hannalie was walking around and she heard Dutch spoken. So she asked if anyone had seen Anne Frank, and they said, yes, she was there. And they brought her to the fence, and she saw Anne, and she was emaciated. She didn't have clothes. She just had a gray blanket wrapped around her. And Hannalie came back. Well, Hannalie asked Anna, is there anything I can do for you? And she said, if you could get me some clothing. So Hannalie came back to the barrack. And she told me about it, and we together gathered clothing to throw over the fence the next night. And at that time, I joined Hanali, and I saw her myself. We threw the bundle over the fence, but it was dark, of course. We could only do this in the dark. And a woman came, picked up the bundle, and ran off. And so Anna didn't benefit from what we had hoped to get to her at all. I did not see Anna again because 2 days later we left the camp. But Hanali told me many years later she collected another bundle of clothing, threw them over the fence, and then Anna did get the clothing, but she was so ill. Her sister, Margot, already was inflicted with typhus. And I don't think Margot and Anna lived for many more days after my encounter with her. They both were declared dead in Bergen-Belsen and buried in mass graves.
And today there's a tombstone marker at Bergen-Belsen. Can you tell us just a little bit about Bergen-Belsen today? There's a small museum there, is that correct?
There is an educational museum. It is a large memorial with beautiful grounds, beautiful trees and shrubs, which weren't there in my memory. And after the war, many people put down a stone for relatives or friends who had died there, because everybody was buried in mass graves when the Allies came and didn't know what to do with all the dead bodies there.
Okay, so when you arrived in Switzerland, tell us a little bit about, that was another very heartbreaking story where you were separated from your family, from your mom and your brother because they were too ill to travel. So walk us through that story and then when you arrived in Algeria.
Right. And so first we were put up in some horse stables. And of course, the Swiss were very reluctant to come near us because we had carried so many diseases. A couple of days later, we were told that we were going to go to Switzerland. I mean, we were going to go further, and we weren't really told where we were going to go. And I resisted at every stop. I talked to people and said, I have to go back to St. Gallen. That's where my mother and brother were hospitalized, but nobody would even listen to me. And so sometime later, we arrived in North Africa in a camp called Philippeville, or at least outside of Philippeville. And the difference between Bergen-Belsen and Philippeville was like night and day. But I was alone. I was with people that I knew from Westerbork or Bergen-Belsen, but people were pretty sick, and they were just fighting for survival of their own families. And it was very difficult at first. I had no contact with my mother and brother because there was no mail until about 3 months later, after the war had ended. I received a telegram saying that they were recovering. From then on, we had regular correspondence, and in each letter, it was mentioned that the wish was for being reunited. I was hoping they would take me back to Switzerland. And also, if that didn't work, couldn't they come to Philippeville so we could be together? None of that ever happened. And it took 1 year for my visas and my immigration papers to be ready to come to America. We had relatives in America who had arrived there a few years earlier, and they sponsored us. And so finally, of course, transportation was very scarce after the war. America wanted to bring all the soldiers home before Christmas, and every ship was full. But finally, a ship became available, a Liberty ship, and traveled 21 days on a turbulent ocean to arrive in Baltimore on Christmas Eve. And then we came to shore the next day. It was all frozen. We had to be taken into lifeboats to get on land because the boat couldn't get close to the dock with all the ice surrounding it. And then and was taken to a train from Baltimore to Grand Central Station in New York, where I met my relatives, who I lived with for 6 months until my mother and my brother arrived, and we were united to start a new life as a family.
And then tell us about your educational journey. You loved learning, but you had been deprived of education, what was it, almost 2 years?
3 years.
3 years. So tell us about it. And you were so happy to get back to school, and then your time at Queens College and then at Duke University.
Yes, I was starved for going back to school, and I went to high school for 2.5 years. Then after I graduated, I was admitted to a city college, Queens College, which was tuition free. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible for me to go to college. My mother had never worked, so she did menial jobs. And my brother worked for an insurance company and went to school at night. I went to school in daytime and had a variety of after-school jobs. After I graduated, I wanted to study at university. I chose economics and went to Duke University in North Carolina, where I met my husband. And after we both finished studies for our PhDs, we lived for a few years in Washington, D.C. He was a postgraduate fellow at the National Institutes of Health, and I was able to get a job at the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. After a few years of living in Washington, D.C., we came to the University of Michigan. We both eventually became professors. He in psychology department as a neuroscientist, and I was the economist in School of Public Health, where everyone studying for a master's degree was required to learn some economics. I have 2 children, and my daughter has lived in Israel for many, many years. So I have 2 Israeli granddaughters, and my son has given us a grandson. So we have 3 grandchildren and 1 great-grandson living in Israel.
That's wonderful. So before we open it up for questions, let's just go back through just some of the messages, the work you've been doing since what, 1987, when you began talking to schools and talking about your experiences with more than just your experiences, but your message of never a bystander, triumph over tragedy. Can you talk to that, just the work that you're doing and why that's so important actually now more than ever?
Right. Well, when I first arrived in America, actually, it was the first night, my relatives, who were wonderful, like parents, but they told me, now you've come to America, you will start a new life. You have to forget about the past and never speak about it. And this was followed by 4 decades of silence. My experience resembles the experience of many other survivors who were given the same message. And even my mother, my brother, and I did not frequently talk about the Holocaust. So one day I was invited to join a panel about Anne Frank because there was an exhibition that traveled throughout the country and came to Detroit. And as I was thinking about my role on this panel, I became aware of the fact that Anne Frank could never speak. Her voice was silenced forever. And it really became my responsibility to be a witness, to testify about what had happened, and to break the silence. And so from that time on, I have spoken in schools. I don't know how many schools, but for 37 years, I think I have. And maybe I wouldn't be doing it anymore if I didn't have such wonderful feedback from students, mostly middle school, but also high school and college and religious institutions. And the feedback is so enriching, so gratifying that it's kept me going till the present time. And what I like to transmit to the students is the message that one should never be a bystander, because often they ask me, do you think that something like the Holocaust could happen again in our country? And I have to answer, yes, it might. And the reason it might is that there was Hitler and there were all the other people who followed him. And then there were the victims. But what about all the people who did not accept the ideology of the Nazis? And they didn't do anything. And their silence made it possible for something like a Holocaust to occur. And so I find this to be a really critical message. I mean, every institution has so often used the slogan, never again. But just talking about never again has made it an unfulfilled promise. And I think if we want to go beyond never again, an unfulfilled promise, then we need to be active in fighting for justice, in fighting against discrimination, oppression, depriving human beings of their basic rights, persecuting them, deporting them. And we see these symptoms, these phenomena all over the world today. So I think it's a really important message. And it's also important to show that one can triumph over these horrible things, and that I don't believe in miracles, but they can happen. And I see my life as a survivor. I attribute some of that to these passports, which were a miracle. And so maybe we all need to hope for a miracle so that we can overcome this pandemic that we are facing today.
That's so interesting. And you often mention too that it was a miracle, but it was a miracle that your father and mother had worked so hard to make possible.
That's true, for sure.
And so I think we'll end on that inspiring message that we all have to recommit ourselves to this really diligent work. Jessica, if you want to open it up for questions.
Yes, absolutely. So to the attendees, just to reiterate, if you want to ask a question, there is a Q&A and you can go ahead and put that question in there. Okay, so our first question, in your book, you mentioned learning Dutch and working on French and English. Since then, have you picked up any other languages? Do you have a love of languages? Or was learning these languages all just another part of life for you?
I have not picked up another language, and my French is not very fluent anymore because I haven't had opportunity to use it. But German and Dutch, I have used quite a bit, and they are still important languages to me. I did not uh, enjoy hearing German for a long, long time. I didn't want to have anything to do with the language. I wouldn't speak it or listen to it. But I've come around. I have gone full circle so that now I do accept and read books in German again. And I won't turn my back to people who speak it. And I've always loved Dutch. Um, I was 7 years old when I came to the Netherlands, had almost 6 years of complete elementary school education, had many friends, some of whom I am in touch with even today. And I've joined a group here on campus which promotes Dutch culture and Dutch journalism. And so those are my three languages. And French, I just dabble in.
All right. Our second question, Irene, is, had you read the diary of Anne Frank prior to making the decision to speak about your life?
Yes, I have a number of times, but it was first sent to me in 1947. I think it's the first edition of the diary by my best friend, Vera. We went to school, to elementary school together, and became very close friends. And she found out that I had survived after the war. She contacted me, and the first thing that I received was the diary of Anne Frank. Of course, I read it right away, but I've read it several more times, and every time I read it, I discover new things, new aspects of her life and her thinking in the book.
Okay. Third question. Could you tell us more about Zaytuna?
Yes. Well, my daughter, after she graduated from high school, she left home and went to Israel. And she has lived there for, I think, 40 years, something like 40 years. And she married a Palestinian. Her reason for going to Israel was to find her Jewish identity. And she married a Palestinian and has two daughters who are both Jewish and Muslim. And that is not easy for anybody to live in two cultures, especially if there is so much conflict between those cultures. There are many similarities, but politically, there's been so much conflict. So, because of her, I have become very interested in what is happening over there, and I have known other Jewish women in this community who also had children living in Israel, and we used to get together for coffee. And then after 9/11, when things became so much more severe, we decided to form this group consisting of 6 Palestinian and 6 Jewish women. And so we are 17 years old now. We meet every other week in our living rooms, except now we can't. So we have to meet on Zoom, which we do. We, just to describe it briefly, we're a women's dialogue group, and we talk about difficult issues that are difficult to talk about in other groups. And we've become very close. We do other things too, but the group, the motto of the group, the core of the group is refusing to be enemies. And I think we all have changed by living, adopting this motto.
Thank you, Irene. I love this question. What is your secret to a long life?
Well, being healthy,
Mhm.
doing, at this time in my life, it's very important to work on physical fitness, because if you don't do it every day, then you lose it. So I've not always, not earlier in life, spent that much time, but for the last 20 years, I've made sure to keep my body in good shape. And that in and of itself keeps your mind in good shape. And I think optimism, and maybe more than anything else, to be involved in helping other people and doing good things, working for a cause. I think that keeps one going.
Great. Are you in regular contact with other survivors?
Yes, I have been. I had a number of friends from the camps who lived in New York and other places in America, and for many, many years we kept in touch. But I'm the only one still alive from that group, and I feel very lucky that in several cases I'm in contact with the children of my friends who are the survivors, and it's wonderful to have that continuity, to keep the memories of their parents alive by keeping in contact.
I think going back to the Zaytuna, what are some of the issues that you talk about in your group?
Oh, multiple issues. We talk about Zionism. We talk about power, about inequities. We talk about displacement, about how do we deal with hatred when it comes up, because there's so many horrible things happening. How to practice refusing to be an enemy. Sometimes it's politics, and sometimes it's philosophy, and sometimes it's humanity. A great variety of subjects, and of course, we're not all members stayed in the group, because some moved away and all kinds of reasons. So 5 of us are still the core members who started the group. And it's wonderful to have these relationships over such a long time.
Oh, I can imagine. So many survivors suffer from PTSD. Did your family suffer from that type of mental trauma? Did the advice to remain silent cause additional stress, which kept the survivors from recovery?
Yeah, I would say that my mother suffered from depression, and my brother, not depression, but a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I have read that taking a group of survivors and going into more depth of their life afterwards, a very large percentage definitely had therapy. And also, I'm a member of a group of second generation survivors, children of survivors, and all of their parents had therapy, intensive therapy after the war. Of course, immediately after the war, that was not available. The concept of post-traumatic stress syndrome didn't even exist. So it was a lot harder than it is now to be recognized as a survivor and having to deal with trauma.
Did what you went through as a child impact your choice to learn about economics at the university?
Yes, you mean what led me to economics?
I believe so. I think that's
Yeah.
what the question is.
Well, in college, when I first started college, I thought I wanted to become a social worker because I had been helped by social workers a number of times. And I thought that would be a wonderful career, but I found the courses very dull. And at the same time, I was taking a course in economics and found it much more interesting for me anyway to learn about how different societies deal with resource issues, and it's a very broad field, economics. So that just led to graduate school in economics.
Okay. What things did you recover from your life before the camps? Did you ever recover your book with the signatures? I think that's the Posey book.
Yes,
Did you get that back? Did you get to keep your pink blanket?
yes, right. Pink blanket is on photos, and the poesy book it's very delicate now. It's sort of falling apart, but it's still a treasure because it has little passages. My parents, my brother, my uncle and aunt, other relatives, and then all my girlfriends who wrote in it with beautiful stickers, and two of my teachers wrote in it, and it's very gratifying to remember them. And the second teacher was already wartime, so that was quite apparent from his entry. So I'm very lucky because I certainly didn't have it with me through the concentration camps, but a neighbor in Amsterdam was willing to keep it, and after the war, she returned it, and it's almost the only thing besides my pink blanket that I have from my childhood.
Wow. That is the last question that we have, but we do have a comment. It's a hello from London and Tobias saying good health to you all, and thank you so much for all that you do, Irene. See you here soon.
Hope so.
As that is our last question, is there anything else you want to share with us, Irene?
Can't think of anything. Maybe Judy has another comment or something she
Well,
wants to.
just one small thing. In interviewing other people in the World War II era, I interviewed an original Rosie who was a welder out in Richmond, California at the Kaiser shipyards. And I did a little research on Irene's ship that she took to America. And it turns out that most likely her name is Phyllis, the welder, the Rosie out in Richmond, most likely welded Irene's deck house on the ship that she took to America. And so we're really hoping someday to connect Irene with Phyllis. And that would be just a joy for me to connect the two, because they're both strong women who are an inspiration to all of us and to many generations. And with that, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Irene, again. It's always a joy.
I do want to thank Judy because she has been such an advocate for my book, and she has publicized it and included it in her newspaper for students, and onward and onward. And it's really wonderful to have met you, Judy, and hope we continue to work together.
Likewise, thank you. And hi, Tobias.
Lovely. Okay. Judy and Irene, thank you so much for coming and joining us and doing this for the library. It is a weird, weird world right now. So I'm so thankful that you were willing to do this on this platform. I know that we had something much larger intended, but it is what it is. So thank you for your willingness to share your message.
And thank you, Rebecca. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. So for all of our attendees, thank you so much for stopping by. We will have this recording, and I guess have a great afternoon.
And you too.
Thank you.
you.
Stay healthy.
Yes,
So.
everyone.